I was born in the middle of a civil war. And since then, my whole life, I have had war around me, around my family. This war, the war against the FARC, this war was a brutal war. We had so many massacres, so many days. People started to get immune to seeing people die. That's why we had to stop this war, to end the war. You must continue to try to bring peace to this country, otherwise Colombia will have no future. If you have a port of destiny, no matter what type of winds you have against you, you can use them to get to your port. You must continue, persevere.
Muchas gracias, bendiciones.
I sincerely hope that the peace we reached will be a peace that will last forever, and it's a peace that change the course of our country for the better.
Batallón Guardia Presidencial. Honores para arriba del pabellón nacional. Atención presente.
Colombia has been a very violent country since our independence.
We have, unfortunately, a sort of a culture of violence that goes back to the 19th century, when we had over 12 civil wars in Colombia.
More wars than any other country in Latin America. But this war, the war against the FARC, has been the longest, 54 years.
Colombia was the oldest democracy in the Western Hemisphere except for the United States. It was such a wealthy, blessed country. If you could ever stop the violence and have inclusive economics and inclusive politics, the long-term future of the country was just almost unlimited.
The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, known as the FARC, began in 1964 as the armed wing of the country's Communist Party. The guerrilla group's Marxist message to overthrow the government found broad appeal among small farmers and rural workers suffering under extreme poverty and inequality. Classified as a terrorist organization by Western countries, the FARC financed their terror through kidnappings and ransom, extortion, and receipts from cocaine sales. Juan Manuel Santos was just 13 years old when FARC emerged. He was one of 4 boys born to Enrique and Clemencia.
My parents were wonderful parents. My father, he was that type of person who people love at first sight, very agreeable. He made many friends. My mother had a different temperament. She was much more disciplined, much more austere in her emotions. My father, when I was a cadet in the Naval Academy, you can see the expression. She was not very happy. My father was very proud.
Our father was a journalist. Through journalism, he had ink in his blood. He worked in our family newspaper, El Tiempo, for almost 60 years.
My father always stimulated me to trust my instincts, but always said, do what you think is correct, no matter if it's popular or not.
Juan Manuel was always a person that knew what he wanted. Ambitious, yes, without a doubt. And since he was very young, he liked politics, and he always thought in great scale.
After spending 3 years in the Navy, Santos spent the next 12 studying abroad at the University of Kansas, the London School of Economics, and Harvard University.
That gave me an opportunity of seeing life in the world with a more broad perspective and with a more global approach.
That perspective included living in London during the time of IRA attacks, including one bombing that killed a man, injured 20 more, and knocked Santos to the ground. When he returned home to Colombia in 1982, Santos spent the next 9 years as the deputy editor of the family's newspaper.
That's when Pablo Escobar was the most dangerous drug trafficker, most powerful drug trafficker that I think the world has ever had. He went after everybody, especially after journalists.
The time when we felt most threatened directly was Pablo Escobar and his people because of their offensive against journalism.
He blew up El Espectador, which was the other newspaper. He murdered whoever he wanted.
The husband of my cousin was killed in the bomb that Escobar put in a Bianca airplane. And the threats, the constant threats that he made were really intimidating. He created a climate of fear, a sort of a dictatorship of fear in journalism that is just, I just get the shivers just thinking about what we went through.
We have lost our best leaders, our best journalists, our best policemen, our best judges.
In 1984, Santos faced a dilemma when he was told that Escobar held secret negotiations with former Colombian President Alfonso López Michelson. Escobar was offering to give up his drug business to avoid possible extradition to the United States. Many at the newspaper advised Santos not to publish the story.
I said, look, why don't we wait a while? And he said, no, we can't wait. We have to publish that. The next day, the scandal was enormous. I think in retrospective, and as a journalist, he was right.
By the 1980s, Colombia had the highest murder rate in the world. 1/3 of the country was under the control of the FARC, and another third was controlled by the drug traffickers and the paramilitary groups that protected them.
Fundamentalmente, los paramilitares se convirtieron en un ejército de ocupación que utilizó métodos de terror extremo. Los paramilitares llegaban a los pueblos muy retirados, y sacaban a la población a la plaza pública, donde hacían verdaderos espectáculos de tortura.
The FARC's tactics were equally brutal. In 1999, the coffee farm of Emilio Rojas was the location of one of these massacres.
Que esa tarde viajé a Bogotá a comprar las semillas para sembrar y allí se quedó mi familia, mi papá, mis hermanos. Y esa noche, ese mismo día, en la noche ingresó un grupo armado y los asesinó. Y desde entonces tuve que dejar allí todo porque igual me buscaban a mí también para asesinarme.
Much of the rural areas where the FARC had presence was at war. People get accustomed to seeing death, seeing massacres.
Lo más común era la violación sexual de las mujeres, el descuartizamiento de los cuerpos enfrente de los familiares y de los amigos, de los ciudadanos de una población.
One night in the town of Novita, Modesta Rivas watched as rebel soldiers kidnapped her husband.
Lo sacaron de una cantina. Lo torturaron. Lo torturaron, le sacaron los dientes, le rasgaron las orejas, le cortaron la lengua. Todo eso decía, déjenme ver a mi familia. Yo no he hecho nada, ¿por qué me hacen esto? Yo quiero ver a mis hijas, déjenme ver a mi familia. Lo tiraron a un caño. Le hicieron todo eso, le dispararon y lo tiraron a un caño.
After her husband had been murdered, Rivas learned that rebel soldiers were planning to rape her and her daughter. So they fled in the middle of the night and became 2 of the 8 million Colombians who were driven from their homes during the civil war with the FARC.
Hardly any family had escaped the violence of that terrible time. They were longing for an end to the mindless, endless violence.
When a society simply forgets or loses the ability of feeling compassion, that society is simply a society that has no future. That for me was extremely, extremely worrisome and in a way a stimulus to end the war.
By the time Santos was tapped as finance minister in 2000, the country was on the brink of being declared a failed state.
Yo recuerdo que hubo años en que nosotros perdimos años en la policía. En un año perdíamos hasta 700 policías que eran asesinados por el crimen y por las guerrillas. Casi 2 policías diarios morían en nuestro país.
The war was making it almost impossible for him to attract international investment. Santos saw the brutality of the war firsthand.
That park over there, that was a very nasty neighborhood. And from there, they did an attack on this palace. And, I was Minister of Finance at the time on the outgoing government, and suddenly we saw a bombshell, and there was an attack on this palace from that park over there. I was in the middle of the war.
Bombings, kidnappings, and human carnage weren't the only fallout of the war. Wide swaths of Colombia's majestic and delicate ecosystem were systematically being destroyed.
The rebels, particularly the FARC, committed many environmental crimes, particularly attacks on the oil infrastructure that generated oil spills in many sensitive environmental areas, like the Bay of Tumaco and others.
In 2006, Juan Manuel Santos became Minister of Defense, where his priority was coming up with a plan to weaken the FARC.
I went to my friend Tony Blair, who was Prime Minister, and I said, please help me with intelligence. And he introduced me to the head of MI6, who helped me a lot to reorganize the intelligence of all the forces.
We sat down and had a very frank discussion about what Santos needed, and he made it clear that in order for there ever to be a solution, FARC had to be gone after and weakened. You know, I said to my people afterwards, this is a good guy, give him everything he needs.
Santos' reorganization of Colombia's intelligence agencies paved the way for his first triumph over the FARC. In 2008, he implored those around him to come up with a plan to rescue 15 hostages being held by the FARC, including 3 Americans, 11 Colombian police and military, and former senator and presidential candidate Ingrid Betancourt, a French-Colombian woman whose kidnapping and 6+ years in the jungle had captured the world's attention.
I said, please think out of the box. If you have an idea, no matter how crazy it is, spill it out.
2 women in the military, who for years had been listening in on the FARC's radio transmissions from the jungle, suggested that government soldiers could pose as rebels and trick the guerrillas into handing over the hostages. While many in the military dismissed the idea as foolish, Santos didn't. He approved Operation Jaque.
Esto tenía unos riesgos muy grandes y tenía, por razón del tiempo que llevaban secuestrados, necesariamente unas repercusiones políticas nacionales e internacionales.
I was risking everything because I knew that if that went wrong, I had to resign as Minister of Defense.
Que dice, yo asumo la responsabilidad política. O sea que aquí se suma una serie de liderazgo en distintos niveles.
As the mission unfolded, Santos listened in.
Everything was calculated to the second. There was no doubt whatsoever that if they were discovered, they would have been executed right away.
When the first helicopter stayed on the ground, 10 minutes longer than expected, and the all-clear code never came, Santos feared the worst.
In those 10 minutes, between the moment that the code should have arrived, I thought about everything, about my life, about how I had to resign, about how I'm going to have to explain to the country why many soldiers had died.
Tengo solamente una cosa que decir. He estado encadenado durante 10 años.
The hostages had slowed down their own rescue by refusing to go with the Colombian soldiers who were posing as rebels. Once the helicopter lifted off, the soldiers told the hostages, "We are the National Army. You are free."
I called her mother and I said, "Your daughter is free." And she said, I don't believe you, I don't believe you. And I said, well, I will bring her to you. We flew to Bogota and the mother was waiting. I delivered Ingrid to her mother. You rescued 15 persons from the middle of the jungle without one single drop of blood. We had to strike them at the very top, and this operation had a tremendous impact, demoralizing the heads of the FARC.
Con la gestión del ministro Santos y con todas las acciones, fueron acciones estructurales que permitieron romper el mito de que las FARC era intocable.
Two years later, in 2010, Santos was elected president, largely based on the successful war he was waging against the FARC. He received 69% of the vote. It was the largest margin of victory in Colombia's history.
This photograph was taken the day of my inauguration. We went to where the Indian leaders, the indigenous governors, they're called, and I went there to ask for their permission to come to the Congress and be sworn in as president. They gave me their blessing. They told me to take care of Mother Nature. The indigenous communities have been attacked by FARC or recruited with force, their kids. And they gave me this stick, which is the signal of power.
He was able to see, had the imagination and the vision to see, that this was the moment when you could pivot to peace.
When Juan Manuel, as president-elect, started speaking of peace, starting a peace process with the guerrilla. And that immediately caught my attention. That, oh, speaking of this now, this is interesting.
Desde que conocí a Juan Manuel, siempre me habló de la paz. Siempre estuvo pendiente de cómo construir para llegar a un país en paz.
No solamente para mí, sino para muchos, no estaba dentro del, digamos, el libreto político ver esa transformación del presidente.
President Santos has shown me and a lot of other Colombian leaders that you have to have strategic aims. Governing is not about pleasing.
Making peace after long and bloody conflict is not a work for the faint-hearted. And you can't expect to be appreciated in the short run. You should do it if you believe it's the best way to give your kids and grandkids a better future.
While the Colombian public was weary of war, there was also widespread resistance to negotiating with guerrilla leaders who had terrorized the country for decades.
Uribe, Pastrana, Samper, Gaviria.
Previous presidential attempts at brokering peace had failed miserably.
Betancourt.
What Santos did that his predecessors didn't
Turbay.
Was look outside his borders for help.
Lopez. At the beginning of the process, I brought in some international advisors who had hands-on experience in negotiations in the Palestine-Israeli conflict, in Northern Ireland.
This was someone who was completely sincere in his genuine desire to change the lives of the people and to bring peace where before conflict had been the norm, and thousands and thousands of people suffering as a result.
Santos is a student of history. He and his team studied 17 conflicts around the world to learn what strategies led to peace and those that didn't. His government began holding secret negotiations with the FARC.
They wanted a ceasefire since the beginning. I said no. I applied the rules of the game that I imposed in these negotiations, which was what I call the Rabin Doctrine. You fight terrorism as if there is no peace process, and you negotiate the peace as if there is no terrorism.
He was never anyone who wanted to compromise with terrorism. He just thought if it was possible to create the circumstances in which terrorists would cease to be terrorists, and in particular the next generation would find a different and better and more fruitful existence, then they should be offered a way out.
I'm neither a hawk or a dove. It depends on the situation. Sometimes you have to be a hawk, and an effective hawk, to achieve peace.
On November 4th, 2011, just 15 months after taking office, the Colombian military came to President Santos and told him they knew where FARC leader Alfonso Cano was hiding. The Marxist commander had encouraged mass kidnappings of the country's political and economic elite in order to pressure the government to release high-ranking guerrillas.
The decision to authorize the operation by our special forces against Alfonso Cano was probably one of the most difficult decisions, because the negotiations, the secret negotiations, had already started, and we were exchanging messages.
When the Colombian military and national police got to Cano and killed the FARC #1, it really demonstrated to the FARC the capabilities of the military, how strong was President Santos' leadership, and how strong it was our persistence to get to targets.
It was a necessary condition to weaken the FARC, to hit them where it hurt the most, to hit them at the top. Otherwise, they would never sit down and negotiate in good faith.
3 months later, in February of 2012, the peace negotiations became public when the two sides began meeting in Havana, Cuba. But Santos' pursuit of peace was taking a toll on his popularity. As the 2014 presidential election approached, his popularity was at an all-time low.
When President Santos was running for re-election, I was the candidate for the principal left opposition party in the country. I didn't always agree with President Santos, and I must tell you that when I took the step to support him in his re-election, it was the right thing to do, because I had faith that he was going to go through with the peace process.
With unlikely allies like Senator Lopez, President Santos was re-elected by the slimmest of margins. A year later, when the FARC killed 11 Colombian soldiers in their sleep, many wanted Santos to end his pursuit of peace.
The whole country had turned against us. I would say 95% of the country was demanding my father to end the negotiations.
It actually went further within the family. I had a personal fight with my father. I told him, Dad, this is a moment where I think you should start listening to people. He sat me down, he grabbed my arm and he said, I'm gonna keep on going because this is exactly the things I don't want Colombians to experience again. I want to put an end to this conflict.
Deep inside, I knew that this is part of the war and that I couldn't really break the negotiations because of this.
He's taught all of us a lesson about how knowing about history is very important in that it teaches you how people in the past have handled important situations and learn about their mistakes or success.
Juan Manuel ha sido un hombre absolutamente coherente en temas de paz. Siempre, todo lo que hizo en su carrera pública lo hizo pensando en ese puerto de destino, la paz.
On September 26, 2016, after 6 years of painstaking negotiations, Juan Manuel Santos finally arrived at his port of destiny. When he signed a peace accord with the FARC that formally ended over 50 years of civil war, during which 220,000 Colombians had been killed.
Lo que firmamos hoy es una declaración del pueblo colombiano ante el mundo de que nos cansamos de la guerra, de que no aceptamos la violencia como medio para defender las ideas, de que decimos fuerte y claro, no más guerra, no más la guerra.
Six days later, Colombians were asked to approve or reject the peace accord in a nationwide vote.
We invited the negotiators, their families, the ministers, their families. We're going to have a huge party and celebrate how we were going to win.
I came that night from the Pacific region, and I immediately came to the palace to celebrate. I was sure that we're going to win.
When the results finally came in, we lost by a tiny margin, but we lost. And I quite frankly was not prepared for that.
President Santos and supporters of the peace accord had underestimated the painful imprint that decades of FARC terror had left on their country.
Yo creo que fue un momento muy difícil, porque como colombiana y como esposa de Juan Manuel, pues no me imaginé que el país fuera a decirle no a la paz.
The country let him down, but I saw that night a true leader who persisted and proved the country wrong.
My sons, my wife, the negotiators, my ministers, they were all devastated, very emotional. And when you're very emotional, you're not a good advisor. So I told them to leave me alone for a while.
When I saw my father there sitting in his study, just thinking, he wasn't sad, he wasn't angry, he was just thinking his next move. It showed how cool-minded he is, how he was going to turn this around.
I closed my eyes and I meditated for about 4 or 5 minutes to sort of clean my mind of emotions, and then I started thinking, well, how can I find a positive aspect of this disastrous result?
No me rendiré. Seguiré buscando la paz hasta el último minuto de mi mandato, porque ese es el camino para dejarle un mejor país a nuestros hijos.
It was the worst week of our lives. Seeing my father's work for almost 25 years of his public life come to an end was devastating, was very sad. All of a sudden, we start hearing people screaming. We didn't know where it was coming from, and somebody from our security detail says there are around 200 students saying that my father should keep on going.
President Santos and supporters of the peace agreement had also underestimated the scale of the opposition led by his predecessor. Critics argued that the punishment for FARC guerrillas outlined in the peace agreement was too lenient. They also objected to a provision of the plan allowing former rebels to participate in politics, a fixture of peace processes around the world.
There is no way that an army of the size of the FARC is going to give in if the only route is jail and silence.
I cannot allow the peace which we had already in our hands to simply disappear. How am I going to proceed? What is it that I can do? I invited the leaders of the no votes to sit down and renegotiate the agreement.
Despite the fact of the difficulties, many in the international community were watching and really appreciate that effort to consolidate the peace. That kind of spiritual courage is very rare.
4 days later, the winds changed when the phone rang at 4 o'clock in the morning.
I woke up, I answered the phone, and I heard a voice saying, "Congratulations. Congratulations for your father's achievement." This was Ingrid Betancourt, the former presidential candidate that was kidnapped by the FARC, calling me from Paris. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
My son Martin called me.
He answers, of course he was sleeping, and I said, "Dad, you just won the Nobel Peace Prize."
I was so asleep, and I said, "Oh, call me later," and I hang up. And he said, "This can't be so." So he called again and again and again. And finally, I woke up and I realized that it was true. I never thought that I would win the Nobel Prize, especially after losing the referendum. This gave what I was trying to pursue, a new agreement, a tremendous push. The backing of the international community, that was how it was interpreted here. And I needed that encouragement and that backing in order to continue to reach my port of destiny.
Responding to the Nobel Committee's challenge to continue the peace process, Santos and the negotiators went back to work. His critics were angered when he took the revised peace accord directly to Congress, where it was overwhelmingly approved.
It's part of his characters to be tenacious, perseverant, and audacious. And those three elements were essential in bringing about the peace process and not giving up.
This agreement succeeded because President Santos did not allow the acts of violence and the very furious opposition to intervene with the end arrival point of bringing peace to a country and dedicate all of our efforts to social development and social change.
To have taken it this far is an extraordinary achievement. I used to always say to him that the real lessons of conflict resolution are that you need to get a framework that both sides perceive as fair. You need to be prepared to implement that over a long period, not a short period of time. The agreement for peace is the beginning, not the end. You need to understand there are going to be real and profound setbacks along the way, and you need finally never to give up.
La paz y la concordia son parte de esos valores compartidos. Son un anhelo común y un sueño que hemos buscado hacer realidad desde hace años, décadas, siglos.
Many consider me a traitor to my class. Many of them thought that I was elected because I was very successful making war and that I should have continued making war. And the fact that I sat down with my former enemies and negotiated peace, that was treason.
Que un hombre es un hombre, que cada vida es sagrada y que toda guerra es una derrota. Muchas gracias.
Creo que es importante decir que el presidente ha tenido coherencia en la búsqueda de la paz y que ha tenido una coherencia obstinada y terca, que es muy importante porque hay veces en que todo es adverso.
This was a really tough thing to do. This was frankly tougher than Northern Ireland, tougher I think than any conflict I've been involved in. I would put the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the same bracket.
I think he wanted to give all those Colombians a different set of choices. And I think he was willing, in the end, to risk his standing in the short run to enhance Colombia's standing and quality of life over the long term.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2016 to Colombia's President, Juan Manuel Santos, for his resolute and courageous effort to end the country's more than 50 years long civil war.
Y les doy las gracias al Comité Noruego del Nobel, porque en esta ocasión no solo premiaron un esfuerzo por la paz, ustedes ayudaron a hacerla posible. El sol de la paz brilla por fin en el cielo de Colombia y que su luz ilumine al mundo entero. Muchas gracias.
This is an award I received in the name of all Colombians, and especially the victims. I carry the victims in my heart, and I will carry them until I die. I spoke to many victims because it became an exercise for me, an intellectual exercise, speaking to the victims, to get refueled in order to continue. And I talked to them, tell me about what happened to you. And they started describing the most terrible dramas. For example, his father and 3 brothers were murdered in that farm, the same farm. He was displaced the next day. Almost 19 years, then he went back. And to see him today, showing me with pride, I have 100 hens, he said. And then he showed me his 15 cows. And then he showed me the coffee. And he said, I'm an entrepreneur now because the peace and the programs that the government is putting in place has allowed me to recover my dignity. I will never cease to be a victim, but now I can smile and I can see the future with hope. Modesta Rivas was one of millions of victims. And what we decided at the beginning is to put the victims, their reparations, at the center of the solution of this war. Policy I put in place at the beginning of my second term, give free housing to the most vulnerable people, which are the victims, displaced, and in this case, a woman.
En octubre del 2014 me llaman y me dicen, señora Modesta, ya tiene la casa.
Señora Modesta Rivas.
No, mejor dicho, la familia, todos, la alegría, eso fue algo espectacular. Dios mío, por fin, gracias, mi sueño.
A house for any family, especially somebody who never had any idea or not even the wish of having their own house. To give them a house changed their lives.
El presidente Santos, pues, con su gobierno, yo le doy gracias porque estar en esta casa es paz.
His life has served someone else other than himself. There was a phrase in one of his speeches, live your life in a way that you made someone else's life a little bit better.
When President Santos left office in 2018, 7 million victims of the Civil War had already received government assistance. Businesses around the country were thriving. Foreign investment was on the rise. And the New York Times ranked Colombia as the #2 tourist destination in the world.
Slowly but surely, a more peaceful, more normal life has returned, making it possible for people to develop the innate resources of the country.
There was a time when Colombia and Bogota and all these parts of Colombia were known for violence. Even today, that's not the case.
As a result of the peace process, the murder rate in Colombia is the lowest it has been in 50 years. And the 9,000 weapons the FARC turned over were destroyed by the United Nations and will never again be used to kill.
Miles de armas se han entregado a buena custodia y no serán jamás de hoy en adelante una amenaza para cualquier ciudadano de nuestro país o del mundo. Es un día muy especial, un día que jamás olvidaremos, el día en que las armas se cambiaron por las palabras. Y puedo decir desde el fondo de mi corazón que por llegar a este día, por vivir este día, por lograr este día, ha valido la pena ser presidente de Colombia.
Bueno, yo debo decir que como viejo oficial de la policía que fui por más de 38 años, director de la policía, nunca imaginé el día en que las FARC harían dejación de las armas. Realmente lo que hubieran producido serían muchos muertos, policías y soldados y miembros de las comunidades. Con ese parque de armamento hubieran podido sostener esa guerra por mínimo 8 o 10 años más.
Well, what I've been able to learn is that there is no conflict that cannot be solved. Nobody thought that peace with the FARC could be possible. No society can live forever at war. This is something that goes against human nature.
I believe that President Santos' legacy, not only in Colombia, but internationally, is a demonstration that dialogue can work. That dialogue is the way to cross the profound differences that separate people and the great conflicts that separation produces, including war.
You should never minimize stopping bad things from happening. But whether good things happen depend upon often what people do and the decisions they make after the peace is made, and how much people can let go of the past and build on the future. And those are things that the Colombians are going to have to work out. How it all plays out will depend upon what happens next.
I'd say to the people of Colombia, just remember the darkest days of this conflict and what it was like. Debate by all means the right way to go forward, but don't let it slip backward. That would be a big mistake.
History will recognize this incredible effort. President Santos in the future is going to be recognized by new generations of Colombians from taking our country from war to peace.
But peace came at a steep political price for Juan Manuel Santos. His opponents accused him of going easy on the FARC terrorists. His popularity plummeted, and in 2018, he would be succeeded by a president who opposed the accord.
When I look back on my presidency, on the peace process, on my life, what I would like somebody to say, there was a president in Colombia who brought peace to his country. And I say to myself, what a cost in terms of my family, my popularity, my political capital. Then I think about how many lives we have saved. I say to myself, it was worthwhile.